The sun beamed down warmly over Enugu that Saturday morning, the kind of morning that promised magic. Nestled in the heart of the bustling city, Grace Temple Chapel stood tall and regal. Its pristine white walls glistened under the cloudless, blue sky, and inside its hallowed halls, history was about to be made. Grace Temple wasn't just a place of worship. It was where the elite tied the knot, said their final goodbyes, or whispered their most desperate prayers. If you held any sway in the city, you wanted your wedding here. Today the compound overflowed with celebration. Elegant floral arches framed the entrance, and long ivory ribbons fluttered in the breeze. A parade of luxury cars, Benzes, Range, Rovers, Rolls-Royces, crept through the gates like royalty arriving. Uniformed drivers jumped to open doors for guests decked in lavish Asibi fabric, glittering jewelry and pride. Laughter, high-life music, and the sweet scent of fresh roses laced the air. Inside the church sparkled. Golden chandeliers swayed gently from high-vaulted ceilings. Thick drapes in white and gold framed massive windows where sunlight poured in like divine approval. At the altar stood Pastor Elijah Bamidele, a man of calm authority. Though his belly had softened with age, his eyes still carried the sharpness of a man who had seen much and loved deeply. His salt and pepper hair framed a warm, knowing smile. Pastor Elijah had served Grace Temple for over 2 decades. He had married hundreds of couples, buried souls, and prayed over countless broken hearts. His voice, deep and deliberate, carried the kind of gravity that made even the arrogant listen. Today he wore his ceremonial white robe stitched with golden threads. He stood still, Bible in hand, silently observing as guests filled the pews. Politicians, oil magnates, Nollywood stars. But there were also faces that didn't fit, unfamiliar expressions, shifty glances. Pastor Elijah noticed. He always did. But for now he remained silent. It was, after all, a day of joy. The bride, Amara Okafor, was the heart of the celebration. She was the beloved daughter of one of Enugu's wealthiest and most respected families. But unlike many heiresses, Amara was known not for extravagance but for her humility, grace, and generous spirit. Her quiet charm had earned her the nickname Princess of the People. Today, she was marrying a man who, by all accounts, was a fairy tale match, her childhood best friend, Tunde Olakunle. They had been inseparable as children, then lost touch after his family relocated abroad, only to miraculously reconnect. Years later, Pastor Elijah adjusted his glasses and checked the time. The ceremony would begin soon. At the altar, the groom stood in a sleek white tuxedo, smiling with confidence. He was striking, tall, deep-skinned, and classically handsome. Guests nodded in admiration. But Pastor Elijah had seen many grooms over the years, and something about this one didn't sit right. The smile was just a little too perfect. The fingers tapping on his thigh weren't anxious. They were restrained, like a man holding something in. It wasn't the nervous energy of a man in love. No, it was something else. Something guarded. Pastor Elijah said nothing, but whispered a silent prayer. Lord, if anything is hidden on this day, let the truth rise. Music began. The choir's harmonies soared. Guests straightened in their seats. Cameras clicked. Anticipation bloomed. The flower girls danced down the aisle in matching blush-pink dresses, scattering petals like dreams. The moment had arrived. Then came the soft notes of the wedding march. All heads turned. And there she was. Amara stood at the church doors, draped in a white gown that shimmered like the night sky over a quiet river. Her veil covered her face, but her graceful posture, the quiet poise with which she walked, left no doubt. This was a woman born for this moment. Arm in arm. With her father, Chief Okafor, she took her first step down the aisle. Guests stood to their feet, beaming. At the altar, the groom's smile widened, but Pastor Elijah saw it again. The flicker in his eyes, the twitch in his shoulders. It wasn't love. It was alertness, like a man preparing to run. Lord, if this is not of you, stop it before it is too late. As Amara neared the altar, Tunde reached out to take her hand. Their fingers touched, and for a moment the illusion held. Picture perfect. But deep inside, Pastor Elijah felt it again. A strange, cold breeze that didn't belong. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Yet no one else saw it. To the crowd, this was the perfect love story. But every fairy tale has a hidden beginning, and Amara's began long before the glitz, the roses, and the groom standing at the altar. Amara Okafor had grown up in a world most people only saw on TV, a world of wealth, luxury, and prestige. Her father, Chief Okafor, owned an empire of hotels, construction firms, and international real estate. In Enugu, the Okafor name opened doors that others only dreamed of knocking on. But despite all the riches, Amara's childhood had been modest. In spirit, her parents had raised her with deep values, humility, generosity, and kindness above all. She had no taste for gold-plated toys or red carpet drama. Her happiest memories were barefoot afternoons in her grandfather's dusty garden, chasing butterflies and playing with the one boy who had ever truly had her heart. That boy was Tunde Olakunle. Tunde came from simpler means. His family had lived modestly in a small compound near the Okafors, but their bond as children had been unshakable. They climbed mango trees, built imaginary castles in the sand, and promised each other the kind of eternal friendship only children believe in. "I'll always be here for you, Amara," Tunde once whispered, their hands clasped tightly. And Amara, at just 8 years old, had believed him with every beat of her young heart. But life had its own ideas. One day, just like that, Tunde was gone. His father had received a job offer in the UK, and the family left in a blur of suitcases and tears. No farewell, no messages, no contact, just silence. Amara had cried for days. She kept the small wooden bracelet Tunde had carved for her. Faded and worn, but to her it was a treasure. Years passed. She grew into a stunning young woman with quiet confidence and a sharp mind. She studied business at Oxford and returned home to take her place in the Okafor Empire. Suitors came, drawn by beauty and wealth, but Amara's heart remained untouched. Until one rainy evening changed everything. She had just returned from a board meeting when her phone buzzed. A new message on Instagram, a request from a name she hadn't seen in over a decade, Tunde Olakunle. Her hands trembled. "Is this really you, Amara? After all these years? Please. Tell me we can meet." She almost deleted it. It had to be a scam, right? But the more they chatted, the more impossible it seemed that anyone else could know the stories, the jokes, the exact tone of those childhood memories. Her heart began to believe. Tunde explained how his parents had kept him strictly monitored, abroad. No phones, no social media. How he'd searched for her for years. How only recently he'd found her through a mutual friend's old photo. He apologized again and again for vanishing. And Amara, soft-hearted and yearning, forgave him. She even told him she still kept the bracelet. They agreed to meet. The reunion took place in a quiet cafe in New Haven. Amara wore a simple blue dress and no makeup, too nervous to care about appearances. When Tunde walked in, tall, charming, with a shy smile, she felt like the universe had pressed rewind. Fiorn. Boy was now a man, confident, well-spoken, warm. They talked for hours, trading memories and laughter. It was as if time had stood still and waited for them to catch up. That night, the spark rekindled into a flame. From then on, they were inseparable. Dinners turned to late-night walks. Voice notes turned into weekend getaways. Sweet words turned into kisses, promises, plans, and then came the proposal. Under a starry sky at the Okafor family's private resort, Tunde dropped to one knee. "Let's write the next chapter together," he whispered. Amara said yes with tears in her eyes. The whole city rejoiced. News of the engagement lit up social media. A real-life love story. Childhood friends turned soulmates. Her parents had hesitated. Chief Okafor especially had questions. "Where has this boy been? Why now?" he asked. But seeing Amara so full of joy, her mother convinced him. Our daughter knows her heart. Let her follow it. Preparations began at once. Nothing was spared. Top designers, international caterers, imported orchids. It was to be the wedding of the year. And yet, as the day drew near, Pastor Elijah Bamadel's unease grew. It began during premarital counseling, a sacred tradition, at Grace Temple Chapel. Every couple sat through at least 3 sessions to prepare not just their outfits, but their spirits for the lifelong journey ahead. Amara was radiant during those sessions, smiling, blushing, clearly in love. But Tunde was a little different. At first, Pastor Elijah chalked it up to shyness. Many men grew awkward discussing emotions in front of a spiritual elder. But over time, small things began to feel off. One afternoon, during a light-hearted memory game, the pastor asked, "Tunde, which festival did you and Amara enjoy the most as children?" Tunde smiled and said, "Oh, the Yam Festival in April, of course, we never missed it." Amara giggled in agreement. But Pastor Elijah's stomach tightened. Everyone raised in Enugu knew the new Yam Festival happened in August, not April. April was far too early. Only someone who had Googled the event would make that mistake. Pastor Elijah said nothing, but a ripple of suspicion stirred in his spirit. Another time, someone in the church office joked, "Tunde, you remember Mama? Ifeoma's Akara stall near your old house?" Tunde laughed. "Ah yes, the woman who sold roasted yams and plantains at the junction." The group laughed politely, but Pastor Elijah didn't. Mama Ifeoma had been known across the entire district for her famous Akara. Bean cakes, not roasted yams. Another crack in the perfect story. When asked about his family, Tunde would lower his gaze and speak vaguely. "They're all gone. I lost them abroad. Please, Pastor, I don't want to talk about it." Most people respected that, but not Pastor Elijah. He sensed avoidance, not grief. And then came the moment that truly rattled him. During the final wedding rehearsal, Tunde leaned in close and said, "Sir, can we maybe skip the speak now or forever hold your peace part? You know how people cause unnecessary drama sometimes. We just want peace." Amara had laughed. "Tunde, are you hiding a secret wife somewhere?" "Come on, babe," he said too sharply. "You know that could never happen." He smiled after, but the sharpness had already shown. Pastor Elijah didn't laugh. That request was not normal. The speak now portion wasn't just tradition. It was sacred, a divine moment for truth to interrupt if it must. He gave a calm reply. "Ah, my son, love has nothing to fear from truth. We will keep the full ceremony. You'll be glad we did." Tunde had nodded quickly, but Pastor Elijah saw the flicker of tension behind his eyes. And so, the quiet weight in the pastor's chest grew heavier. He had conducted hundreds of weddings. He knew when nerves were just nerves, and when they were hiding something. 2 days before the wedding, the first real fracture revealed itself. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon. The sun hung lazily over Enugu, casting warm shadows through the stained glass windows of Grace Temple Chapel. Inside his modest office tucked behind the sanctuary, Pastor Elijah Bamadel sat hunched over a stack of wedding programs, cross-checking final details. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called gently. The door creaked open and an elderly man stepped inside with deliberate care. He wore a plain brown agbada, its fabric faded from years of wear. His gait was slow, but his eyes, sharp and haunted, spoke of urgency. "Good afternoon, sir," the man said, bowing his head. "Good afternoon, Baba. Please, have a seat," Pastor Elijah responded warmly, rising to help the guest settle into the chair across from him. "My name is Baba Olakunle," the man said slowly. "I was the uncle of Tunde Olakunle." The air in the office shifted. Pastor Elijah remained calm, but his heart skipped. "You were his uncle?" "Yes," Baba said quietly, his voice now trembling. "But that man, The one marrying. In 2 days. Is not my nephew. The words settled like a cold fog over the room. The pastor leaned forward slowly, his pulse quickening. What do you mean, Baba? Baba lowered his voice to a whisper. I saw the wedding notice. I saw his picture, and my spirit recoiled. That is not Tunde. He may look like him. He may sound almost like him. But I know my blood. That man is a stranger. Pastor Elijah said nothing. Years of experience had taught him to listen closely when the Spirit speaks through elders. Even if many years have passed, Baba continued, Tunde would never hide from his family. Never. Not from me. A long pause passed between them. Then Baba leaned closer. There's a way to be sure, Pastor. My nephew was born with a star-shaped birthmark behind his right ear. If that man does not have it, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Pastor Elijah leaned back slowly, deeply troubled. This was no longer a quiet feeling in his heart. It was a warning, clear and sharp. Thank you for coming forward, Baba, he said solemnly. Baba stood, adjusted his cap, and said, I have spoken. The rest is in your hands, Pastor. He exited as quietly as he came, a shadow disappearing into the golden light of late afternoon. For a long time, Pastor Elijah remained seated, hands resting on his Bible, heart heavy. He prayed for discernment, clarity, and courage. That evening, during the final private meeting with the couple before the church closed for preparations, he acted with gentle intent. They sat in the chapel's back hall, the stained glass window, casting soft colors over their faces. Amara Okafor was glowing. Tunde was smiling. Pastor Elijah smiled back and said casually, Tell me again how you two reconnected. It's a beautiful story. Amara's face lit up. Tunde found me through Instagram, she said. A friend posted an old picture. He said he recognized me immediately. Isn't that something? The pastor murmured. Then he turned to Tunde. And your memories? Tell me, Tunde. What was your favorite place to play when you were children here in Enugu? Tunde chuckled, but the laugh didn't reach his eyes. Ah, Pastor. Memory is tricky, you know. But, yes. We used to play by the fountain in Bodija every evening. Amara smiled. Yes, the Bodija fountain. But Pastor Elijah's smile faltered slightly, only on the inside. There had never been a public fountain in Bodija during their childhood. Bodija was known for its quiet estates and bustling markets, not water features, not then, not ever. It was a subtle mistake. But again, it was a mistake only a stranger would make. Before he could press further, Amara gently placed her hand over Tunde's. Pastor, she said kindly, those childhood memories are so far back now. What matters most is our future. Her voice was calm, firm, protective. Pastor Elijah didn't miss the way Tunde relaxed instantly at her defense, like a man who had just passed a checkpoint. Still, he kept smiling. But in his spirit a storm was rising. That night, after locking the chapel doors, Pastor Elijah stood under the stars outside the church. The city's night air felt thick with something unsaid. He looked up at the vast heavens, then closed his eyes and whispered, Father, you see what no man sees. If this union is built on deception, tear away the veil. Let the truth be revealed before it's too late. The wind rustled through the trees as if carrying his prayer into the sky, and somewhere, in the shadowed corners of that night, truth began to stir. The morning of the wedding arrived like a royal festival. The streets around Grace Temple Chapel were packed. A stream of luxury cars, black SUVs, shining Bentleys, even a few vintage Rolls-Royces, formed a proud procession around the church walls. Security personnel in sleek uniforms moved with practiced grace, managing traffic and guiding elite guests to their places. Women in flowing aswebi of teal and gold fluttered past like elegant butterflies. Their gel head wraps stood like crowns. Men in tailored agbadas greeted each other with laughter, backslaps, and political whispers. Inside the church, every pew was filled. Politicians, business tycoons, royal descendants, actors, and musicians. All seated in reverence and excitement. "This is the wedding of the decade," someone murmured, fanning themselves. "I heard the deputy governor is attending," whispered another. The air buzzed with perfume, jazz-infused hymns, and sheer anticipation. In the center of it all stood Pastor Elijah Bamidel, firm yet composed. Bible in hand, robe shining under the stained glass light, he was the only one whose spirit remained unsettled. He scanned the congregation with a subtle, searching gaze. He could feel it, that quiet throb of warning in his soul. A whisper, not from this world, "Be ready." At the front row sat Chief Okafor, Amara's father, regal and unreadable. Beside him, Lady Ifeoma, her mother, held a lace handkerchief, her eyes filled with pride and unspoken worry. Amara stood radiant in her gown, her face glowing with trust. She knew nothing of the storm quietly forming above her head. And there, beside her, was Tunde, the man who was not Tunde. Pastor Elijah swallowed hard as he began the ceremony. He led the couple through the opening prayers. The congregation sang, lifted hands, and wiped joyful tears. Many took quiet photos. To them, this day was the embodiment of love's triumph. But Pastor Elijah moved with spiritual caution. Every word he uttered was weighed, every gesture measured. When he reached the moment in the ceremony that Tunde had tried to skip, the sacred pause that had raised red flags, his voice rang out loud and clear. "If anyone here knows a reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." A sudden silence fell like a dropped curtain. The air stood still. 1 second, 2, 3. People shifted, some smiling nervously. A few giggled. The moment was almost over. Then, a sharp sound. A chair scraped back against the tiled floor. Gasps erupted as all eyes turned. From the third row, an elderly man rose slowly to his feet. It was Baba Olakunle. The color drained from Amara's face. Tunde's fingers, wrapped around hers, tensed unnaturally. Not in affection, in fear. The old man raised a trembling finger and declared, voice quaking but loud enough to shatter the silence, "That man is not my nephew." The church gasped in one unified breath. Murmurs burst like wildfire across the pews. Amara turned to Tunde in disbelief, her eyes wide, searching for some explanation, some comfort. Tunde's mouth opened, but no words came out, only silence. Pastor Elijah took a long, steady breath. This was the moment, the one he had feared, the one he had prayed for. The mask was cracking. The truth, whatever it was clawing its way to the surface. The church was no longer calm. Voices rose in whispers and protests. Shock spread like heat. Amara stood frozen, her hand still held in Tunde's, though her whole body seemed ready to pull away. Pastor Elijah stepped forward slowly and spoke with a calm, powerful tone. "Brother Tunde," he said, locking eyes with the groom. "You've heard the accusation. For the peace of all gathered here today, we ask that you respond." Tunde swallowed hard. Then, forcing a shaky smile, he laughed lightly, unconvincingly. "Pastor, I don't know what's happening. Maybe Baba is mistaken. It's been years since we last met. People change. But I am Tunde Olakunle. I'm Amara's childhood friend. Please, let's not let confusion ruin this beautiful day." Some guests nodded, confused. Others frowned deeply. Amara looked at him, her lips parted. She wanted to speak, to believe, but didn't know what to say. Pastor Elijah raised his hand. The murmurs quieted. His eyes were clear, unwavering. "You say you are who you claim. Then this will be simple," the pastor said. "The elder mentioned a birthmark, a star-shaped mark behind your right ear. Will you please show it to us?" The church held its breath. People leaned forward, all eyes locked on the man in the white tuxedo. Tunde froze. His hand twitched toward his ear, then stopped. He laughed again. weaker this time. I had it removed. Years ago. Surgery. I didn't like it. It was ugly. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Who removes a birthmark behind the ear? Someone whispered. Lies, said another. Pastor Elijah remained calm but firm. He stepped closer, the air heavy with divine pressure. My son, he said gently, if the mark is gone, then surely a scar remains. Let us see. Let this moment have peace. Tunde shook his head, more insistently now. Please, Pastor, this isn't necessary. I respect you, but Amara knows me. She believes in me. He looked at Amara, his eyes pleading. She looked torn. Her trust battled with doubt. Her heart leaned forward while her mind stepped back. But Pastor Elijah raised a hand again. Let us see, he said. And this time, it wasn't a request. It was a command. Slowly, Tunde turned his head. Slowly, he lifted his hand to pull his ear forward. And slowly, the truth revealed itself. There was nothing there. No mark. No scar. Only smooth, untouched skin. A collective gasp swept through the congregation. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was thick, unforgiving. Pastor Elijah's voice did not waver. It was soft yet cutting. My son, now you see why questions are rising. Speak the truth. God is merciful, but this altar demands honesty. Tunde's shoulders slumped. The power in his body drained as if he had been deflated. His lips trembled. He searched for something to say. And then, he broke. I'm not Tunde, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Gasps exploded again. Women clutched their chest, some covered their mouths. A man shouted, Blood of Jesus, my real name is David Okon. And just like that, the entire wedding unraveled. The name hung in the air like thunder after lightning. David Okon. Shock rolled through the chapel like an earthquake. The once beautiful sanctuary, dressed in flowers and filled with joy, now felt like a courtroom. Every eye fixed on the man who had, moments earlier, stood at the altar as the beloved groom. Now, he was a stranger. A fraud. Pastor Elijah Bamidele's voice was calm, but it carried the strength of a man rooted. In truth, tell us everything, David, all of it. David closed his eyes for a long, agonizing moment. When he opened them again, the performance was over. The charm had vanished. His voice shook, but it no longer tried to lie. I was Tunde's roommate. Abroad, he began, voice low. We met in university. He was like a brother to me. The church was still. Nobody moved. Not even the air. I was there on scholarship. I had nothing. No parents, no family, no home. Just ambition and hunger, he said bitterly. Tunde was the opposite. Money, connections, a future already, carved for him. But after his parents died in a car crash, he changed. David's voice cracked. He became quiet, lonely. He started talking about home, about Amara. Said she was the only one who ever made him feel like more than a name on a trust fund. People in the crowd began to weep quietly. But not Amara. She stood frozen, her eyes locked on the man she had nearly married. He showed me her photos, David continued. Their messages, their old childhood memories. He planned to come back to Enugu and rebuild what they had. David's jaw clenched as if reliving a wound he'd carried for too long. But then, Tunde had a car accident. It was bad. I was the one who held his hand when he died. A collective gasp rose from the congregation. Afterwards, David said, his eyes brimming with tears, real or rehearsed, no one could tell. I was lost. I had no money, no job. I couldn't even stay in school. I was drowning. Then his voice hardened. And then I remembered Amara. The air thickened. I remembered her beauty, her name, her wealth, her family. Amara flinched, as if the memory itself slapped her. I saw their messages, their connection. I had watched it for months. I had studied it. He stepped forward, slightly trembling. I made a choice. I became Tunde Olakunle. A groan of horror rippled through the crowd. I used his photos, his memories, his life. I found a way to reach her. I told her everything she wanted to hear. And when she believed, I came back to Nigeria. David looked directly at Amara. Now, and this time, he didn't try to wear Tunde's face. I never meant to hurt you, he said, his voice breaking. I fell in love with you too. Somewhere along the way, the lies became real, but I didn't start this out of love. I started it out of survival. Chief Okafor stood, fists clenched at his sides, eyes burning with betrayal. David turned, back to the crowd. I was tired of poverty, tired of hustling, tired of sleeping on floors. This was my way out. If I married Amara, I would have access to the trust fund, respect, a life I could never earn honestly. The church went deathly silent, and then a soft sob broke the quiet. It was Amara. Her shoulders shook, but she didn't cover her tears. She let them fall like rain from the sky. Pastor Elijah stepped closer, his voice a mix of grief and divine. Wait. And what about love, David? What about this woman's heart? What about the future you plan to build on lies? David's posture collapsed. I tried, he whispered. I tried to love her. But I reminded myself every day, love can't feed me. Love can't pay rent. I told myself to stay focused. He dropped to his knees at the altar. I'm sorry, he wept. I'm so sorry. But the damage was done. The illusion was gone. The wedding was over. For a long moment, nobody moved. The guests were too stunned, too wounded, too heartbroken. Amara stood trembling, the vision of her perfect day shattered before her eyes. Her veil had slipped back. Her cheeks were wet. But she stood tall. She did not collapse. She did not scream. She simply stared at the altar where the man she thought she loved had fallen to pieces. Suddenly, David shot to his feet and ran. Like a man possessed, he turned and sprinted down the aisle, crashing into a flower stand as guests gasped and shouted, "Stop him!" But before he could reach the side door, two men in dark suits stepped out swiftly. Security, placed there quietly at Pastor Elijah's request. They caught him mid-sprint. He struggled briefly, wildly, but they held him firm, twisting his arms gently behind his back and escorting him out of the church. No one blocked their way. No one spoke. David's head hung low, his shame now heavier than chains. Chief Okafor stepped forward, his voice hoarse as he leaned toward Pastor Elijah. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you for seeing what we did not. Pastor Elijah said nothing, only nodded, his eyes wet with holy sorrow. What had been meant to be a celebration of love had turned into a revelation of deceit. But perhaps it had also become a rescue. The chapel emptied slowly. What had started as the most anticipated wedding in Enugu's elite circles had ended as the city's most shocking scandal. Guests walked out in stunned silence, their once excited voices now replaced with murmurs of disbelief, heartbreak, and indignation. Some paused to hug Amara Okafor gently, whispering quiet words of comfort. Others shook their heads in sorrow, still unable to grasp the magnitude of what had happened. A few cried openly. But no one blamed Amara. They blamed David Okon, the man who had walked into their sacred space wearing another man's name, stealing not only an identity, but almost a future. As the last of the guests filtered out, the once celebratory church now stood eerily still. The scent of roses still lingered in the air. The ribbons still fluttered from the rafters. But everything else, the laughter, the joy, the innocence, was gone. The next day, the news swept across the city like a wildfire. Heiress saved from Impostor Groom at the altar. Grace Temple pastor exposes fraud at society wedding. Amara Okafor's heartbreak sparks nationwide conversation on deceit and identity theft. Every news outlet had a headline. Every gossip blog had a theory. People questioned everything. How had no one noticed sooner? How had a man fooled one of the most powerful families in Enugu? But behind all the noise, away from the cameras and chatter, a young woman sat quietly in her family estate, grieving. Amara did not flee to London or Dubai or Paris, though she easily could have. She stayed. She stayed in Enugu. She stayed in the home where her dreams had bloomed, and then died. She cried. She didn't pretend to be strong. She didn't put on a mask for the world. She let the heartbreak run its course. There were nights she didn't sleep, mornings she couldn't eat, days she didn't speak. But even in her pain, she refused to let bitterness win. Day by day, piece by piece, she began to heal. With the support of her parents, her closest friends, and a community that loved her even more now for her strength, Amara slowly rebuilt. 3 months after the wedding that never was, she made her first public appearance, not at a party or fashion event, but at a women's rights seminar she organized herself. The event was hosted in a modest conference center, filled with young women, mothers, students, and professionals. Amara stood at the podium in a simple blue dress, her natural hair tied back. No jewelry, no luxury, just conviction. I trusted blindly, she told the room. I ignored the signs because I wanted to believe in love. I wanted the fairy tale, but now I know better. And I will use my story to help others see the red flags and to protect their dignity, their identity, and their hearts. The hall erupted in applause. That day, Amara officially launched the Beacon Foundation, an organization focused on empowering women, raising awareness about emotional fraud, and offering legal and counseling support for victims of deceit. Pastor Elijah Bamadel watched her from the back of the room, eyes full of pride. She had come through the fire and emerged as gold. Time moved forward. Enugu's streets returned to their usual rhythm. Honking buses, busy markets, endless chatter. But something within Grace Temple Chapel had quietly shifted. Since that wedding, Pastor Elijah's presence had grown. His sermons were deeper now, burning with divine urgency. His words cut through noise like light through fog. People began traveling from outside the city just to hear him preach. The man who had stopped a wedding, who had listened to the Holy Spirit when everyone else was distracted by glamour. And every Sunday the church overflowed. One Sunday in particular, the pews were packed. Pastor Elijah stood at the pulpit, Bible open, his voice clear and unshaken. People of God, he began, discernment is a gift. Blind trust is a danger. He paused, scanning the congregation. Love is beautiful, but love must never be blind. Hope is powerful, but hope must walk hand in hand with wisdom. Heads nodded slowly across the sanctuary. Some closed their eyes. Others gripped their Bibles tighter. If something inside you whispers that something is wrong, don't silence it. Listen, pray, wait. He closed his Bible softly. God does not rush. His timing is perfect. He reveals truth, always, in due season. A quiet amen rolled through the crowd. In the front row sat Amara Okafor, no longer a bride but something better, a woman reborn. There was no ring on her finger, no man by her side. And yet she radiated something far more powerful than before, resilience. Pastor Elijah looked at her and smiled. There was no bitterness in his heart for David Okon, only sorrow. But there was also deep gratitude, because the truth had surfaced before it was too late. And as for Amara, she had not been destroyed. She had been refined. Months passed. The scandal faded from the headlines, but the echoes of it still lingered quietly in Enugu's conversations, sometimes in whispers at dinner parties, other times in cautionary. Advice passed from mother to daughter. But for Amara Okafor, life did not stall. She didn't freeze in the pain of what had been. She chose to move forward, not with speed but with purpose. Her days became filled with activity. She poured herself into the Beacon Foundation, now gaining national attention. Schools invited her to speak. Conferences requested her insight. Young women wrote her letters, thanking her for standing tall in truth and helping them find their own voices. Amara became a symbol, not of heartbreak, but of healing. Yet in the quiet hours when the speeches ended and the applause faded, she often sat by her bedroom window, staring at the sky, wondering one silent question. Will I ever find real love? Not love built on stories. Not love, wrapped in false charm, but honest love, kind, patient, real. She didn't say it aloud, not even to her parents. But the thought lived with her. And then, as it so often happens in the unexpected turns of life, love arrived, not with a limousine, not with a speech, but with a helping hand and a warm smile. It was a sunny Wednesday afternoon. Amara had gone to a local hospital on the outskirts of town to deliver educational materials donated by her foundation. She wore jeans, a simple white blouse, and sandals. No makeup. No designer label. Just herself. As she walked through the corridor balancing a heavy box of books, her foot caught on the corner of a cracked tile. The box tipped forward. She stumbled. Books began to spill. "Let me help you." A calm, gentle voice. She looked up. Man in simple hospital volunteer scrubs crouched beside her, already gathering the fallen books. His hands were rough with work, his nails clean but worn. There was no flash in his smile, just sincerity. "Thank you," Amara said, slightly breathless. He stood and offered her the box again. "I'm Nathan Ume," he said. "I work here part-time. Are you from the foundation?" She nodded. "Yes, I'm Amara." His face remained warm. No flicker of recognition, no sudden change in tone, no awkward mention of her past. Just a simple, respectful nod. They talked for a few minutes as they walked down the hallway, about the children's ward, about books, about the power of kindness. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't electric. It was peaceful. Later that night, Amara sat by her window again, the same spot where she used to wonder about love. But this time, her thoughts were quieter, not filled with longing but curiosity. She found herself smiling. Days passed, then weeks. She visited the hospital again and saw Nathan. Again he was helping. Again he was kind. He didn't ask for her number. He didn't flirt. He didn't even follow her online. But every time they crossed paths, the conversation deepened. They spoke about faith, about growing up with little, about working for something that truly mattered, and slowly, without pressure or pretense, something began to grow. A bond. Not fireworks, but warmth. Not a spotlight, but a steady flame. When Amara finally told Pastor Elijah Bamadel about Nathan, he smiled the way only wise men do. "You see," he said, "real love does not shout. It does not perform. It does not need a mask or a script. It arrives in truth, in kindness, in patience." And Amara, wiser now, gentler now, knew he was right. She had walked through the fire. She had stood in the storm. She had wept in silence. And now she was standing at the edge of something new, not as the woman betrayed at the altar, but as the woman who refused to stay broken. She had learned to trust her spirit. She had learned to speak her truth. And above all, she had learned this: the most powerful love stories are not the ones shouted from stages, but the quiet ones whispered between hearts that choose to heal together. 6 months had passed since the day Grace Temple Chapel fell silent under the weight of a groom's lie. The seasons had changed. The city of Enugu had moved on. Its markets still bustled, its streets still hummed with life. But for the people who had witnessed that wedding, and especially for Amara Okafor, nothing would ever be quite the same again. Inside Grace Temple, things were different now too. Since that unforgettable day, Pastor Elijah Bamadel had become more than a preacher. He had become a symbol of wisdom, of courage, of divine discernment. People came from far and wide just to hear the man who had dared to stop a wedding and protect a daughter of the land from disaster. Each Sunday the church was full to the rafters. People no longer came just to be seen, and they came to listen. On one such Sunday, Pastor Elijah stood tall at the pulpit, his hands resting on his worn Bible. He looked out at the faces filling the pews, old and young, rich and poor, many who still carried private hurts in their hearts. "People of God," he began, "what happened in this sanctuary was not just a broken wedding. It was a revelation." The crowd was still, listening. There are many who walk among us with polished shoes and empty hearts, many who speak sweetly but carry deception in their mouths. But truth cannot be buried forever. He paused, his eyes finding Amara, seated quietly near the front. Love must never be blind. Hope must never outrun discernment. When your spirit whispers, "Listen," there was a soft murmur of agreement. Heads nodded, some wept quietly. God does not reveal to embarrass. He reveals to protect. He reveals to redeem. He closed his Bible slowly and reverently. And even when dreams are shattered, even when the altar turns cold, God still writes new beginnings. A soft "Amen" rippled through the sanctuary. Amara stood after service, speaking briefly, with well-wishers. But there was no performance in her demeanor, no need to impress. She smiled genuinely. She had grown into herself, not as the society heiress, but as a woman who had survived betrayal and chosen grace over vengeance. That same week, Amara launched a new chapter of the Beacon Foundation, expanding into rural communities to teach young girls how to recognize manipulation, protect their identity, and pursue independence with dignity. She visited schools. She mentored survivors. She helped write policies. And through it all, one presence remained quietly by her side. Nathan Uma. He never tried to steal the spotlight. He didn't speak for her or over her. He simply walked beside her, a companion, a friend, a man whose actions whispered the kind of love others tried to shout. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was something better, steady, mutual, true. Months later, on a calm Sunday afternoon, Nathan joined Amara and her family for lunch in their garden. He helped her mother set the table. He listened respectfully as Chief Okafor told stories from the old days, and as they cleared the dishes together, Amara's mother leaned in with a knowing smile. "He may not wear diamonds, my daughter," she said, "but he carries something. Rare," Amara smiled softly. "Yes, Mama," she replied. "He carries peace." In the quiet moments before sleep, when the world felt distant and still, Amara often reflected on the long, winding road that had brought her here. She remembered the dress, the altar, the silence after the truth, and then the sunrise that followed. She had been betrayed in public, humiliated before a city, her heart shattered in the place where she was supposed to find joy. But she had not stayed broken. She had risen, not in revenge, but in purpose. She had used her pain, not to harden but to help. And slowly, without fanfare, life wove itself into something new. She still carried the scars, but she also carried strength, the kind that only comes from walking through the fire and emerging, with your spirit still intact. In time, if love came fully again, she would welcome it. But she no longer waited to be rescued. She had become the hero of her own story. And somewhere in the back row of Grace Temple Chapel, Pastor Elijah Bamadel would smile knowingly every time he saw her, not because she had survived the lie, but because she had built something more beautiful than the fairy tale. She had built the truth.